Chapter 16, California by Justin Rosales. Shortly after buying my plane ticket, I informed my professors that I'd be flying to California for a few days. They were okay with me going, as long as I made up the work, which I gratefully accepted. After getting my final things together and saying goodbye to my girlfriend, I jumped in the car and started driving home. During the 3 hour drive home from Penn State, I contemplated many things. First, I thought about everything that could go wrong, like missing a flight, getting lost, or even getting mugged. It took me a little while, but eventually I calmed myself down and tried to be a little bit more optimistic. I told myself that what I was doing was important and helpful to my understanding of life. I felt mature traveling alone and taking an opportunity to improve my knowledge. To me, that was more important than my college classes. In the past, I had considered withdrawing from college to pursue knowledge on my own. Of course, there are plenty of benefits to attending a university, but I believed the structure was flawed. Regardless, I really enjoyed the idea of pursuing information that interested me. Not every college class inspired me to do more and become better, but this opportunity did. I was ready to accept whatever came my way. I was ready to take on whatever challenge was ahead, and more than anything else, I was just ready to learn, to understand, and to hopefully gain wisdom. My wandering thoughts on the 3 hour drive made it feel more like 30 minutes. When I got home, it was almost midnight. My parents were happy to see me when I walked through the door. And even though I could see the fear in their eyes when they considered my safety, I told them I'd be responsible and extremely cautious. We're fine, they told me, but their body language said otherwise. My flight was scheduled to leave the following morning at 8:56 a.m. from Pittsburgh International Airport. I was tired of driving and I wanted to get a good night's sleep, so I said goodnight to my family and went to my room. After brushing my teeth, I fetched my laptop to check my email before going to bed. And I searched through my backpack for my power cord to charge my laptop, but it wasn't there. I must have forgotten it in my room at school, I thought. And immediately, the list of everything that could go wrong just flooded back into my head. My laptop was that one resource I didn't want to be without. I took my laptop, plugged it in my family's printer, and just printed out everything that I thought I would need: directions, flight itineraries, and a map of the area near my hotel. I returned to my bed and tried to fall asleep. I was worried about just not being able to use my laptop in California. I soothed my worries by just switching my perspective. Instead, I viewed it as a challenge. I would need to use my resources effectively and be prepared for the unexpected. After 20 minutes of thinking, I finally fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up around 5 a.m. and left soon after. My father bought me breakfast on the way to the airport. I remember feeling nervous, yet excited. By the end of the day, I'd be in a hotel room by myself, thousands of miles away. When we arrived at the airport, my dad hugged me goodbye and wished me well. Going through security made me nervous. For some reason, I was expecting airport security just to arrest me for no reason. I don't know why, but I sort of expected something to go wrong. Luckily, nothing did. My first flight took off from Pittsburgh International Airport and arrived at Denver International. From there, I flew to Oklahoma International. By the time I touched down in Oakland, it was 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and 2 p.m. Pacific Time. It was strange being on the opposite side of the country. I was nervous, but still very excited at the same time. I was on my own. I grabbed my luggage and jumped into a taxi. The driver told me it'd be a $40 trip. I gave him the cash, and as the car started moving, I admired the scenery as we drove through the busy streets of California. Remembering that my parents wanted me to call them when I landed, I pulled out my phone and dialed their number. They told me that they were worried, but glad I was safe on my way to the hotel. They asked me to call them when I arrived. By the time the phone call ended, we had parked in the front of the hotel. I unloaded my bags and tipped the taxi driver. My heart beat with anticipation as I walked over to the office. Now, even though I'd previously spoken to the manager on the phone, I was just still very afraid that they would turn me away because of my age. My worries were swept away after the receptionist smiled and handed me the key to the room. I gratefully thanked her and left the office. The hotel was, by no means, extravagant. There was only one floor and about 30 rooms. The layout of the complex was like a giant U shape. The building surrounded the parking lot where only a few cars were parked. I found my room in the corner of the parking lot. I opened the door and brought my luggage inside. The room had a cozy, simple layout. There was a bed, TV, mini fridge, table, lamps, sink, and 2 beds. I unpacked my clothes and placed them in the drawers beneath the television. After I got everything settled, I called my parents once more to tell them that I was all right. I didn't stay on the phone too long because there was a few more things that I needed to take care of before the sun set. I hung up the phone and collapsed on my bed. In the room adjacent to me, I could hear a man yelling angrily in a foreign language. I was really out of my comfort zone, but I was excited to have the opportunity to embrace it. All my expenses were paid for, and my only priority was to attend the seminar. There would be no more worrying about making the trip possible. I was finally on the trip. The only thing I had left to do was enjoy it. I rose back to my feet and pulled my laptop out of my backpack. I placed it on the table and turned it on. The hotel had free wireless internet access. I quickly checked my email to see if anyone sent me anything about the seminar, and there was nothing. My laptop only had about 10 minutes left of battery. I shut it down to reserve the rest in case of an emergency. After grabbing my wallet and room key, I walked out the door. I had a couple hours until sundown, so I decided to buy groceries. I walked to the office to ask the receptionist if she knew of any places where I could buy food. My map told me where Walgreens was, but I wanted to make sure it was still up to date. I didn't want to wander around aimlessly looking for a building that was taken down years ago. Luckily, she confirmed that Walgreens was still just right down the street. I thanked her and went on my way. It was a cloudy day, and the air was chilly. The streets were busy with cars while children played on the sidewalks. It took me about 10 minutes to walk to Walgreens, bought a few microwavable meals and a couple of fruits. I called Jarrett while I was shopping and updated him about what had happened thus far. On my way out, I found several California shirts on sale and purchased two of them as souvenirs. Across the street from Walgreens was an Office Depot. I stopped by to see if they sold laptop power cords. They had them in stock, but the prices were outrageous. I decided to save my money and continue on without a laptop. After walking back to my room and putting away the groceries, I changed into my running clothes. I wanted to check out the exact location where the seminar would be held later that evening, so I glanced over the map once more and tried to memorize the street names. When I felt comfortable enough, I grabbed my iPod and left. I felt slightly intimidated as I jogged through the streets of Berkeley. I was worried that I would forget the directions, so I kept repeating them over and over in my head. Eventually, I came to my first turn with no problem. Before I knew it, I was standing in front of the building where the workshop would be held. It only took me about 11 minutes to jog from my hotel room to the building. I assumed that it would take me no more than a half hour if I walked. The place was locked and the lights were out. I grabbed one of the pamphlets that were hanging outside the wall, and after catching my breath for 5 minutes, I turned around and started running back the way I came. Knowing where I was supposed to go in a few hours made me feel a lot more comfortable. It helped soothe my worries of possibly getting lost. When I got back to my hotel room, I threw my iPod on my bed and took a shower. A few hours later, I returned to the building. It was a 2-hour session where we were required to come in and finish our registration. They would also provide us with the information packet that we would be using over the next couple days. After we registered, a woman gave her testimony of how her life was personally affected by Tumo. It was 9 o'clock by the time I got out, back home, midnight. On the way back to my hotel room, I called my parents to tell them about my day and to wish them good night. I needed to be at the workshop the following morning by 9 a.m., so as soon as I got back to my temporary home, I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up at 6 a.m. The sun was just rising, so I took a shower, ate breakfast, and began making my way to the workshop. The warmth of the sun's rays against my skin comforted me. The dark clouds from the day before seemed to be long gone. On my way over, I noticed a Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen. One of my best friends at the time grew up in California and told me that Popeye's food was just fantastic and I needed to try it out. I made a note of the restaurant's location and decided to stop by at some point during my trip. Guys, I'm so glad that we're updating the book because a lot of this stuff is just funny and out of date and non-essential. So again, check the description for more information so that you can check the newly updated Becoming the Iceman coming out in the next year. A short while later, I stood in front of the familiar double doors leading to the workshop. I placed my iPod back into my backpack and followed a couple inside. Paintings of old people hung on the red walls. Statues of Buddha lined the hallways. I deduced that I was in some sort of Buddhist temple. I began walking around looking for a room listed on the information sheet. I found it at the end of a long hallway near a life-size statue of Buddha. I entered the room, gave them my name, and took my seat. Hundreds of people sat around me, silently, all facing the stage waiting for something to happen. After half an hour of silence, a woman finally walked onto the stage and introduced the Tibetan monk that would be teaching Tumo. He spoke for a couple hours about how Tumo is supposed to help us transcend, strengthen the Kundalini, and unblock obstacles in our body. He then said something to the effect of, "Some enjoy Tumo because it produces a nice, warm heat in the stomach. However, the heat is only a side effect. The real power comes when you transcend." After his speech, he had us perform breathing exercises. Apparently, this was the final session of a set of workshops that took place throughout the year. In their previous workshops, they had spent their time learning about Tumo's background, how it related to Buddhism, and other various breathing exercises. This session was the one where we were supposed to learn the actual form of Tumo. The breathing exercises consisted of slow, focused breaths. Essentially, we were supposed to hold our breath for a minute while sitting there and also kind of do some awkward movements with our arms. After a quick lunch break, we came back and began learning Tumo. The form was not what I had expected. It didn't seem to be much different from the breathing exercises that we had just performed before lunch. Instead of the only arms moving this time, while holding our breath, we moved our upper torso as well. Our instructor also had us practice visualizing a fire in the center of our stomachs. With each breath, we were told to imagine the flame growing with intensity. I was happy to learn the technique, but I didn't feel like I was getting any warmer. Also, I didn't feel comfortable with all the beliefs that surrounded Tumo. I never studied Buddhism, but I understood the basic premises. They were saying that the only way you could perform Tumo was to follow their methods exactly, and honestly, I just begged to differ. From that point on, I began viewing the workshop from an objective point of view. I wanted to see if it was possible to perform Tumo without their set belief system. Sure, I did the visualization of the little flame in my stomach, as well as the movements, but I remained detached from their views of transcendence. As a result of shifting perspective and viewing everything objectively, I found myself quickly growing bored. Of the 10 hours we spent there on Saturday, we practiced the breathing and Tumo exercises for only 2 hours each. For the other 6 hours we were there, the teacher elaborated on how Tumo affects the body and clears any obstructions in life. At one point, they asked us to imagine ourselves turning into some transcendent female being. I couldn't see how it possibly related to heating up the body. When Saturday's workshop was over, I walked home. I attempted to eat at Popeyes, but I decided to save the $15 I had left in my wallet for my final dinner in California. When I got back to my hotel room, I phoned my parents to tell them how my day went. I also reassured them of my safety. After hanging up, I tried looking over the instructional papers that they had given us on how to perform Tumo, but I found it hard to follow with just all of the beliefs interlaced in the text. I decided that I would bring a notebook with me the following day to objectively record the core concepts of Tumo. When I woke up the next morning at 5 a.m., I realized that I was in the mood to go for a run. I used what was left of my laptop battery to find the directions to the University of Berkeley. The college was a mile and a half away from the hotel, not too far for a run. After eating breakfast out of a complimentary plastic cup, I grabbed my iPod and ran out the door. Eventually, the campus was in sight. It took me about 20 minutes to get to the University of Berkeley. There was a lot of traffic on the road, making it hard to cross intersections quickly. I crossed the street and ran up toward the campus alongside a wooden fence. And as I turned the corner to continue jogging uphill, a speeding bicyclist actually struck me. Luckily, there was just enough time to lower my shoulder and brace for impact. A man flew through the air and yelled as his body skidded across the concrete. He grabbed his knee in pain. He was screaming in some other language that I didn't understand. I repeatedly tried to offer my help, but it appeared that the man just didn't understand me. After I apologized over 30 times, the man rose to his feet, jumped on his bike, gave me a foul glare, and rode off. For the next few minutes, I stood there, feeling guilty, contemplating if the man was seriously injured. As my iPod clicked and the next song began to play in my headphones, I snapped out of my daze and returned to my run. And by the time I reached the campus, I had forgotten the incident. In my opinion, the campus was much more beautiful than Penn State. There was luscious grass everywhere and little pathways that extended in every direction. I continued running uphill until I found myself in the middle of a park. Students were lying on benches and reading their textbooks. It seemed like a very lovely place to study. Near the end of my loop around campus, I found myself running by the University of Berkeley's gymnasium. I remembered it as the place where Dan Millman had trained in Way of the Peaceful Warrior. It was a surreal moment for me, just to be standing next to the gym where my favorite author had trained for many years. I continued running home and arrived 20 minutes later. I took a shower, ate another quick breakfast, and made my way back to the workshop. Mostly, the day consisted of more breathing exercises and Tumo practice. The teacher also taught us two more additional methods of Tumo, but allegedly, Tumo experts should only attempt them. There is one moment in particular that I do think is important to share with you. We just finished the breathing exercises and began one of the Tumo forms. After 10 minutes of doing the form, my body felt warm. 10 minutes later went by, and I found myself actually sweating. By the end of the exercise, my shirt and shorts were drenched with sweat. Somehow, I managed to tap into the side effect of the heat that comes with Tumo. I was ecstatic, yet strangely disappointed. Ever since I had seen the Iceman on YouTube, I couldn't wait for the chance to consciously raise my body temperature. When it had finally happened, I expected more. I didn't like the idea that you had to be sitting down to properly perform Tumo. In the videos that I'd seen of the Iceman, he's running around barefoot in the snow, submerging himself in ice, and swimming around under ice water. The only situation where I saw Tumo being useful to survive would be if someone were forced to be in extremely cold temperatures for an extended period of time. That's the only time where I could see sitting and warming yourself up as efficient. I now understood why the Tibetan monks saw Tumo's main goal as transcendence, not heat. When I exited the building where I spent most of my time over those last few days, part of me felt like the trip was worthless. The other part of me did kind of feel accomplished. I thought, well, now there's at least one way to consciously warm up the body. On the way home, I stopped at Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen for my final dinner in California. Their chicken was delicious, and I was extremely satisfied. After I got home, I decided to go for a walk around the city to help my stomach digest the food. I remembered seeing a sign for a pier on my way to the workshop, not too far off the main street. I figured it was worth checking out. It was a little intimidating walking through the streets of Berkeley at night. When I first diverged off the familiar path, I called Jarrett to tell him about my weekend. Having someone on the phone with me was also a way to calm my nerves from walking through unknown territory. I told him of my excitement that I had on the first day, but also told him how I was disappointed overall. In learning that the Tibetan way of Tumo involved only sitting, I explained that I wanted to learn more about how the Iceman could do what he did. I finished my conversation with Jarrett as I approached the Berkeley Marina Pier. To the side, there was a path that crossed a giant interstate. When I was on the bridge crossing the interstate, I realized that it was the very same highway that goes through my hometown. It was kind of a mind blowing moment. Thousands of miles away from my home and college, I was standing on top of the interstate that leads directly to my house. I continued crossing the bridge and found myself standing atop a hill facing a large body of water. At the time, I didn't know which body of water I was looking at, but in the distance, I saw a long line of lights outlining the structure of a bridge. It was an utterly beautiful sight. I later came to learn that I was gazing at the infamous Golden Gate Bridge. I returned to my hotel room around midnight and promptly fell asleep, but only after setting 3 alarms. The next morning, I was happy to have woken to my first alarm at 4:30 a.m. I packed up my belongings, ate breakfast, and called a taxi. The taxi arrived around 7 a.m. The driver was a friendly fellow, very polite. While he helped me place my bags in the trunk, I noticed he had a twitch that shook his entire body. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but after several more occurrences, I was convinced this man suffered from some form of, perhaps, Tourette syndrome. I was worried about how it would affect his driving, but I climbed in the car anyway. A few minutes later on the ride, I noticed the man jerk a few more times, but luckily his movements didn't affect the momentum of the car. I safely made it to the Oakland airport with 2 hours to spare. During those 2 hours, I called my family, told them I was coming home safe. I also checked into my flight and ate a second breakfast. My first flight took me from Oakland, California to Seattle, Washington. And from Seattle's airport, I flew to Chicago, Illinois. And finally, I left Chicago and arrived in Pittsburgh's airport in the early evening. In total, it took me about 13 hours to finally reach my home in Sharon, Pennsylvania. When I arrived at home, I reflected on my trip as a whole. And although I hadn't learned what I was expecting, I had acquired a very useful experience and actually pursued understanding on my own. It was the first time in my life that I felt fulfilled. As soon as I had known in my heart that I wanted to pursue knowledge, the opportunity opened up for me. All I had to do was follow the path. I was extremely grateful for my safety, yet even more thankful for the experience. It was my first leap in my quest toward understanding the Iceman.